Greetings and welcome to Mz.Rootz online education sessions. In this session, you will be completing Module 2 and be making progress through Module 3. The session's learning objectives include the ability for you to use geological references to study Africa. So as I stated, you'll be completing Module 2, Unit 2.2, which is for you to be able to locate Africa on a modern world map. You'll also be making a start with Unit 3, which is for you to be able to use geographical references to study Africa. And we will be looking at 3.3, which is for you to state key geographical facts of the African continent. For this session, you may need your book, journal, folder and pens to make notes, your course content checklist. By now you should be making logs of your progress. If you don't have this document, access formal session 1, have a look within the description box, and there is a link there for you to download the document. And last but not least, access to your folder on your system so that when you are downloading the documents for this session, they are put in a centralized place, nice and orderly for your access. This session, you will be able to download the 7 Continents Worksheet and the Geographical Facts on Africa worksheet. Look within this video's description box for the links to these documents for you to access and download. In this session, we're going to be looking very closely at the world map and specifically geographical facts about the continent of Africa. Session entitled The World Map and Its Continents. Before I make progress, I need to emphasize that my sessions are based on theory, mainstream theory, and I'll remind you every session that I feel my job is to trigger your critical thinking skills. Now, this is the world map that has been depicted to us by the powers that be. I am conscious that there are other theories about how the world is actually laid out. But I am just going with the mainstream theory. It's now up to you to look into the other theories around the earth and actually concepts and theories around the layout of the world map. But for this purpose, this is a nice starting point because this is what we're taught at school. But there are also other facts that I feel are relative for your knowledge that will actually help put Africa in a positive light and for you to start making connections as to why the continent of Africa is so valuable. So let's make a start. This is a depiction of the world map. And as I say, this is just one theory of how we've been told it's laid out. None of us have been up to space, so we can't actually say that this is exactly what it looks like because the powers that be have that access. But as I say, for this session and for this purpose, this is not a bad starting place. So, how many of you, by looking at this world map, can actually label up the parts of the world can actually label up where countries, continents, cities, etc. are physically located. Well, let's take a look. So identifying the 7 continents. 7. We'll come back to that in a minute. Before we go through actually labeling up the 7 continents, it's imperative that you can define the word continent. Continent actually means a continuous landmass. So a piece of land that is continuous. So let's take a look at these continuous pieces of land mass. Number 1, can you identify what continent this is? That's correct, North America. So if that's North America, number 2 must be, well, what's the opposite of North? South America. Number 3 is considered to be, that's correct, it's Europe. And number 4, I will be very disheartened if you don't know what number 4 is. Of course, it's Africa. Then we have, that's correct, it's Asia. Number 6 is, any ideas? Yes, it's Australia or Australasia. And last but not least, what is this landmass here at the very bottom? It's called the Antarctica. Okay, it's important that you study this. It's going to be necessary for your worksheets called 7 Continents. And you should start to be making connections between this module and the session before on the geological changes to the planet, where we discuss Pangea. You should have learnt from that session that all of the land masses were connected to this central landmass here, the motherland. You can see that South America could quite easily fit back in there. America, North America here. You can see the parts of the world that if you was to merge them back together, they would slip back into a supercontinent, which we discussed in the module before. So the tectonic plates have moved, and this is currently how the world looks from space, apparently. This landmass here that I'm pointing at now, the Antarctica, is melting currently, and there are loads of discussions around climate change and the melting ice caps and the huge glaciers that are melting and causing sea levels to rise and more land to be revealed around this part of the earth, which is another discussion that we should have, because it will effectively impact the continent of Africa, and there will be parts of Africa and the rest of the world that will be vulnerable to these climate changes, the rise of sea level and the rising temperature affecting agriculture, etc., etc. But that's another conversation. So we've spoke about continents being continuous pieces of landmass. This is where I want you to now put your critical thinking cap on and take a very good look at this map and ask yourself where these continuous pieces of land actually are and what is considered a continent technically and logically. This map has no borders on, so that means there's no political influence on this map. And if you was to look at landmass from a bird's eye view, those borders do not exist. You can see that everything is one. Everything interconnects with everything. But for physical purposes, let's take a closer look at the actual continents, which, if we look closer, there is actually only 5. Can you identify the 5 continents according to nature, not politics? Let's take a look. So, number 1, you should know this one, is Africa. As you can see, I'll bring my arrow out. It's a continuous piece of landmass. Madagascar is here, which is also part of Africa, but you have to take a boat to get there. This piece of land here is actually Arabia, Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And as you can see, it's actually connected to Africa at the south, as a south joining. So Yemen and this here would be considered Ethiopia, is actually connected. Yeah, and we've also got the Suez Canal here in Egypt that connects Africa to the Middle East also. Yeah, and as you can see here on the north of Africa here, which I think this here would be Morocco, is connected to South Spain, hence the Moors. Yeah, the Moors did travel north and actually ruled Spain for a very long time. And we've got evidence and remnants of the Moors' time in Spain there. Anyway, I divert slightly. So we've got Africa as the first continent, continuous piece of landmass. I've highlighted the connections to other parts of the world, but for technical sake, this is continent number 1. Continent number 2, which includes all of this, is Asia, previously known as Eurasia, because as you can see, and as you know, politics is now put a borderline here. And this is Europe. Look how little Europe is. I mean, gosh, this is the British Isles. Within the British Isles, we've got Wales, Scotland, England, Northern Ireland. Yeah. So for such a small island, 2 islands, if you like, it's very powerful, isn't it? We've also got Russia. That's politically divided from Asia. But if we're talking about the nature and landmass, there's one continent, yeah, Asia. Then we've got what's considered the Americas, yes. So there's no North America and South America. As you can see, if I take the arrow back, it's one continuous piece of land. Yes, you've got what they call North America here. This little bridge here is Mexico. Yeah, these little islands here are the Caribbean. Yeah, the biggest one here being Cuba. And then you've got South America, but actually it's just one continuous piece of land, isn't it? So can you see the difference between a continent and an island? A continent is a continuous piece of land. The islands are broken off pieces of land surrounded by sea. So we've got the Americas. Then we have Australia. It's a piece of land all on its own. And then the final piece of land would be the Antarctica. Again, it stands on its own. So food for thought. And as you know, I like to always bring things back to a natural perspective. So food for thought there. So we've spent time looking at the land, continuous pieces of landmass called continents, and smaller pieces of land surrounded by the sea called islands. We're now going to take a closer look at the globe and study the oceans. So this is a depiction of the world map with all the continents labelled politically. And if we just stand back and take a look at this for a moment, we can see that the globe consists more of water than it does of land, which is interesting. The earth is actually dominated by water. So let's name these oceans. Let's take a look at the far left first. This huge body of water here is called the South Pacific. And in the middle here, we've got the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah. Hence why we called the slave trade from Africa out into the Americas the transatlantic slave trade. Can you see that? Trans means to travel. Atlantic is the name of the ocean. So we've got North Atlantic and we've got the South Atlantic. Then we've got to the far, far north here, the Arctic Ocean, which is the coldest ocean, which actually would continue round to the back here and link back up with the Antarctica. In between Africa and Asia, we've got the Indian Ocean. And to the far right here, we've got the North Pacific Ocean, also known as Oceania. So those are the huge bodies of water and the names that have been given to them. What's also important for you to acknowledge is this here. This invisible line is called the equator. And it's not actually physically there, it's invisible. But what it does depict is the hottest part of the globe, the hottest part of our Earth. This is where the sun, when it hits the Earth, is at its most potent. And if you take a look what it does to the continent of Africa. It literally goes straight through the middle of the African continent, which is very interesting. This area here where my arrow is actually the Horn of Ethiopia. This is where humanity came up out of the Great Valley Rift, evolved, migrated from here and out. So there's no coincidence that where the sun is at its most potent is where humanity developed, evolved, became sophisticated and migrated. If you take a look over here, South America, and over here, this is India, the Philippines. You will find that along this line here, there will be similar environments. We're going to be taking a look at environments later on in the session. But in a nutshell, anything that's close to the equator is very warm. Any countries close to the equator will be very tropical. So let's take a closer look at the continent of Africa and study some of its geographical facts. We spoke earlier about the invisible line that cuts straight through the middle of Africa. We mentioned the Horn of Africa and the Great Rift Valley. Can you see any other invisible lines that are featured on this map? Let's look north. So, north of Africa, we have the Tropic of Cancer. And south of Africa, we have the Tropic of Capricorn. these lines also depict the sun and its strength and power at those spots on the earth. Have you heard of these words before? Cancer, Capricorn. For anybody that reads horoscopes or is interested in zodiac signs, you will make the connection there. But horoscopes are actually influenced by constellations, which is a different perspective. It's the study of stars, star formation, and an energy that comes off those constellations. So the Tropic of Cancer is actually called the Tropic of Cancer because it's aligned directly with the constellation of Cancer. And the same with the Tropic of Capricorn. It is directly aligned with the constellation of Capricorn. So let's take a look at any patterns that are occurring around these invisible lines which depict strengths of stars, because as you know, the sun is also a star. So the equator is influenced by the sun, and so is Cancer and Capricorn, but also in alignment with constellations, which is very interesting. So anyway, let's go back to patterns. Let's look at the Tropic of Cancer. What is the environment like there? If you have a look, follow the line across. There's no key, and I apologize for that, but we know that that colour there kind of represents desert, doesn't it? And we know that the north of Africa is predominantly the Sahara Desert. So there's a pattern there that shows that the Tropic of Cancer, and actually anything in its path, is desert land. Okay, bear that in mind. If we go to the equator, I mentioned it briefly earlier that it's tropical. So this is where you get your rainforests and lots of trees, lots of wildlife. Straight through the middle of Africa is this environment that's very, very fertile and teeming with life. So it's a tropical climate, yeah? South. What's the environment like down south? Well, it's a mixture, isn't it? Let's go with my arrow. Follow the line. It's a mixture of desert. You've got the famous Kalahari Desert featured there, and also some forest. You can see some forest here. So it's a mixture because it's down south. So that's how the sun has influenced the environments on the continent, and really the continent has a multitude of all types of weathering conditions and environments. There's actually all types of environments on the continent of Africa. So let's zoom in closer into the continent of Africa and take a look at its rivers. There are quite a significant number of rivers, and these are only the main ones. I think it's interesting to note that look how rivers are actually formed. If I take my arrow, you can see that each river has an entrance from the sea. Can you see that? So if you take a look at all the rivers, the entrance is from the sea. And seawater is salty and river water is actually fresh, which is a natural phenomenon. The earth has the ability to remove the salt via its rocks and minerals. And through this natural process, it's able to provide humans with two types of water. The salt water, which is good for numerous things, and the fresh water, which we as humans in particular need to consume. So the earth provides. Also take note of the dotted line that crosses through this diagram here, through this image, which is of course the equator. So this is a zoomed in picture of the continent, and we can see more closer exactly where the equator crosses through with regards to rivers. I'm going to point out here you've got Lake Victoria, where some of the first human remains have been found. So there's the equator, Lake Victoria. A lake is when a river is the beginning, yeah, and creates almost like a pool of self-contained water source. So lakes are almost self-contained water sources that feed into the river, and quite often you'll find springs here where the actual spring is the source that has provided the beginning of the river. We're going to continue looking at environments and any patterns in natural resources that are created on the continent due to any environmental or weathering patterns maybe. Take a look at this diagram. It zooms in even closer, so now you can see names of countries, right? These are the political borders that we do not see on the natural land, but politically we have divisions on the continent due to, let's say, natural resources almost. Let's have this discussion. So if you can imagine, there is an equator going straight through the middle. So keep that invisible line in your head as you look at this map. Think of where the Tropic of Cancer is, and think of where the Tropic of Capricorn is. I'm going to ask, if you look to the north, which is the Tropic of, yes, it's the Tropic of Cancer, what natural resources are predominant in that area? Take a look. I'm going to take my arrow. I'm going to circle the northern area of Africa that I'm talking about. It's just above the Tropic of Cancer, and we know that area to be predominantly desert, correct? And we've had the discussion about the sun's potency in those areas. And if you read the key on the left hand side, we'll see what those images represent. So we can see in the desert areas, we have a lot of oil production, gas production, predominantly. Yeah, we also have oil and gas production on the west coast, here in Nigeria for instance, but the predominant production of that natural resource occurs in the desert. Let's take a look at the belly of Africa. I like to call it the belly because there's just so much minerals in the mid band of the continent where the equator line is, correct? Yes. So tell me, what natural resources are predominant in the mid area of the continent? It's almost everything, isn't it? Everything's there. You've got diamonds, copper, iron, gold, Earlier on in the session, I highlighted that the continent of Africa is the only continent that has the equator, the Tropic of Cancer, and the Tropic of Capricorn running through it, almost chopping the continent up into thirds. I'm going to ask you a question based on that. Do you think that having those areas of sun's potency has impacted the amount of natural resources that the land provides and produces? I also want to ask you another question. Considering the continent of Africa is so abundant in natural resources, why is it that this continent is considered undeveloped with regards to infrastructure developments that would benefit the people on the land? Why has this not happened? Let's take a look at some other natural resources that are produced on the continent. Have a look at the key. Take 2 minutes to really study the key. The key is here and also here, which is a color-coded key. So for instance, let's look for cocoa. Yeah, you see the shape? It's like an oval shape. That is representing where the continent mostly produces cocoa, which is the west coast. So can you name any countries on the west coast? We're thinking places like Ghana, Nigeria. Those are west coast countries. Okay, let's pick another one. Let's look at coffee. So we're looking for the white triangles. And wow, coffee is across both the west coast, in the central, and we've got some coffee production here on the east coast. Let's have a look along the list. So we've got cocoa, coffee, corn, cotton, dates, fruits, rice, oil palm, peanuts, rubber. I'm going to stop at the rubber because rubber is so rare. It's very rare, in fact. And as you can see on the map, there's only 3 major productions of rubber plantations: central and to the west. This here would represent Congo. Yeah. Then let's have a look at the colour-coded area. So the orange represents commercial plantations. So this is farmed land. Yeah. Then we've got livestock raising. If we look south, we've got lots of livestock raising going on. And I'll pick one more. Non-agricultural would be north. Well, why do you think it's non-agricultural in the north? Well, that's because it's the desert, isn't it? Yeah, the Sahara Desert's predominantly there, so non-agricultural means nothing green is going to grow there. But we do have a huge production of dates, which is interesting, isn't it? That dates grow in the desert. This is why when you go to these countries that are based in the desert, such as Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, the dates are heavily celebrated. Like with every meal, you'll be served dates. The same in the Middle East. if you can take your minds back to a time when there wouldn't have been that much trading with the desert, the people of that land, the indigenous people of that land, would have had a heavy reliance on eating dates. So I always like to take things back to the nature and imagine how people would have appreciated eating a date in ancient times. And there's so much nutritional value in a date. I digress slightly, but literally the date harnesses so much nutrients, and you can see how that fruit is being prepared by nature to nourish anybody that consumes it, because the earth is conscious that it's a desert area and there's no other food. So the date holds a lot of nutritional value to nourish the consumer. It's time to begin to wrap up this session, but before we come to the concluding stages, I wanted us to summarise some of the interesting facts that we have learnt about Africa in this session. So let's take a look. You have learnt that Africa is the second largest continent in the world. By incident, what is the first largest continent? Take a look at your maps. This would be a great stage now for you to have downloaded your worksheets, printed them off, and be making links between this presentation and getting those worksheets complete. Let's take a look at a second fact. Africa is the hottest continent on Earth. Yes. Why is that? Is it got anything to do with the equator? The world's largest desert, the Sahara, is located in Africa. The Sahara is located in which region of Africa? Do you remember which direction, which part of Africa the Sahara Desert lies? And a higher order level thinking question would be, which tropic does the Sahara Desert lie on? Did you know that there are over 1,500 different languages in Africa? Most of Africa is in the tropics, except for the peaks of the mountains in the Great Rift Valley. It never freezes. That's very interesting, isn't it? And last but not least, the Nile is the longest river in the world, flowing through Uganda, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Do you remember the source of the River Nile? Where is the birthplace of the River Nile? What is the name of that lake? We are now coming towards the end of this session, but before we conclude, it's time to check your learning. This is the part of the session where hopefully you're with your family or you're on your own and want to check how much you've actually retained from the session. Feel free to press pause when all the questions are up on the screen and really challenge how much of this information you've actually managed to keep in. So let's start. Can you describe what environments are present on the continent of Africa. Can you discuss how environments and location impact natural resources? Are you able to state 3 geographical facts about Africa? Can you discuss how many continents there are? Are you able to state the 6 oceans? Can you recall the 3 invisible lines around the Earth? Are you able to name 5 rivers? We are now at the end of this session. Well done to everyone who has sat through the whole of the session and completed the 2 worksheets for this module. I am very proud of you, and you should be proud of yourselves. Thank you for taking time to tune into my channel and sit through Mz.Rootz sessions. I am truly grateful. Remember to like, share and subscribe. I look forward to reading your comments and feedback.